My daughter-in-law and her parents laughed when I said I couldn't afford dessert. Tonight I'm standing in their favorite restaurant, because I own it now. Rachel's smile dies as I face her server. Lori, you're finished. Effective immediately. Every table goes silent. And my in-laws finally understand. I don't just get even, I take the whole place. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The gas lanterns outside Magnolia House cast warm halos on the cobblestones, and the front door sighed each time it opened to let in more polished laughter and perfume. Inside, the dining room glowed, white tablecloths, pressed napkins, wall mirrors catching the low light and the glint of wine glasses. You could smell butter and rosemary in the air, the faint drift of salt from the harbor whenever someone came in. Maggie Dawson folded her cardigan over the back of the chair and smoothed the skirt of her sensible dress. The table for 5 was tucked along the paneled wall, a good find on a busy Saturday. She'd gotten there 5 minutes early, habit, and watched the staff move with that choreographed competence restaurants learn if they want to survive. Murmur, glide, pivot, smile. When the hostess brought water, Maggie thanked her by name. The name tag said Julie, a small thing people like to hear. Peter arrived second, kissed his mother's cheek like a man already apologizing for something. "Traffic on East Bay," he said, shrugging out of his blazer. "You look nice, Ma." "I'm good," Maggie said, meaning it. "You?" He gave that tilted smile. "Works a lot, but yeah." Then Rachel arrived with her parents in a bright cloud of cologne and pearl earrings, a trio made for a dining room like this. Rachel took the seat beside Peter and brushed a crumb off a table that didn't have any yet. "Mom, you'll love the wine list. They're heavy on Sauvignon Blanc. It's very Magnolia House." "It's very us," Elaine said, the edges of her mouth sliding upward. Walter checked his cufflinks like someone might be photographing them. Their server arrived with the water and a practiced beam. "I'm Lori. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Cocktails to start? The Spanish gin and tonic is a house favorite." "We should," Rachel said, already scanning the menu. "And the pimento cheese toast for the table. It's kind of their thing." "Of course," Lori said, pencil poised. "And, to pace the meal properly, I recommend putting in dessert with your entrees. Our pastry case sells out." "We'll definitely need dessert," Elaine agreed, peering toward the gleaming case near the host stand. "Is that a praline cake, or am I dreaming?" "Praline crunch with salted caramel," Lori said. "The slice is enormous. Charleston on a plate." She looked back at Maggie as if remembering her and shifted her weight. "And for you?" Maggie took her time reading the menu, though she'd already decided. A woman 2 tables over had the grilled grouper, the skin crisped properly, and the smell had been perfect when she'd passed by. "The grouper," she said. "And coffee." "Black?" Lori's eyebrows lifted. "Black," Maggie said. "And I don't think I'll be having dessert." Rachel's head came up. "Oh, Mom!" She caught herself, rerouting with a brisk smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maggie, the desserts here are the best part. You'll regret it." "Saving room for something else," Maggie said, killing any interpretation with a pleasant tone. Elaine laughed, a little louder than the table required. "Saving pennies, are we?" She set the menu down, as if the joke had to be given a place to land. Walter chuckled in a way that sounded like a cough. Peter cleared his throat. "Mom just doesn't care for—" "It's quite all right," Maggie said, laying her napkin over her lap like a flag of truce. She didn't look at Peter. She didn't look at Rachel. She looked at Lori and gave her a patient smile. "Just the coffee." Lori's smirk flickered into place, faint and sharp. "Dessert is kind of the whole experience here," she said, voice pitched to carry a little farther than necessary. "But of course, coffee can be satisfying." She scribbled the notes as if denying a dessert was a personal affront. "Some people have simple tastes," Elaine murmured. "Some people have simple values," Walter added, the edge of something in his voice that told you he liked to try it on in rooms that would let him. "Mom," Peter said quietly. Rachel reached for his hand under the table as if calming a skittish horse. "Let's not make everything a thing," she said. "We are celebrating Peter's promotion." "It was a lateral move," Peter said. "Feels like a promotion," Rachel answered brightly, and the gloss returned to her, to all of them. She ordered the gin and tonic and the duck confit with the air of someone making a statement. The pimento cheese toast arrived quickly, warm and slick, and the conversation turned toward Sandra from Rachel's Pilates class and whether the outdoor concert next Friday would be too hot to bother with. Maggie ate slowly and listened the way she'd listened to classrooms for 30 years, letting tones tell her the parts the words wouldn't. When the grouper came, it was perfect, the skin shattering under her fork, a squeeze of lemon brightening the rich fish. She closed her eyes for a moment. Not everything sweet needed sugar. Lori checked on them between other tables, refilling wine as if playing favorites. She asked Rachel and her parents about their desserts before anyone had finished entrees, and she recited the list like poetry. Praline crunch, chocolate bourbon torte, lemon chess pie, and our seasonal peach cobbler ice cream melting just so. 2 pralines and a torte, Elaine said, and coffee for me with real cream. Of course. Lori turned and, almost as an afterthought, glanced back at Maggie. You sure? I'm sure, Maggie said, her voice smooth as the china. I'm saving for something else. Rachel's eyes grazed Maggie's cardigan, her sensible shoes, the plain gold band she still wore. You've always been thrifty, she said, making it a compliment by the narrowest margin. Maggie took a sip of coffee. It went down strong and dark, grounding. The laughter at the next table rang softer after that. She wasn't angry in a way that would show. No clipped replies, no sudden comment that would be quoted later, and yet something quiet and hot unspooled along her ribs. She watched Lori glide past a couple celebrating an anniversary. The woman in a blue dress laughed with her whole face. The man squeezed her hand like it was an anchor. There were different kinds of currency in a room like this. Desserts arrived like small monuments. Caramel striped the plates, almonds snapped under forks. Elaine closed her eyes as she tasted the praline, and when she opened them she made a show of pity. It really is the best part, she said, and took another bite. Maggie smiled because she had learned how to keep people comfortable even when they didn't deserve it. She tasted her coffee again and set the cup down carefully, the saucer barely clinking. Enjoy, she said, and meant it, and didn't. Peter leaned toward her low. You okay? I'm wonderful, she said. She reached for her water, the condensation cool against her fingertips, and looked past Peter to the host stand where a small stack of business cards sat in a silver tray beside the register. She'd noticed them when she came in, but hadn't read the print. From here, she could just make out a name in clean serif letters, a phone number, and a single quiet word across the top. Owner. Maggie held her son's gaze until he looked away, then put her napkin on her lap again like she might be here a long time. The laughter at the table washed over her. Lori's bright voice sang above it. Isn't it divine? And somewhere a back door thumped, letting in a quick breath of briny air. Saving for what? Elaine asked finally, curious and careless in the way children pull wings off flies. Maggie lifted her coffee, steam curled up, smelling like possibility. You'll see, she said, and smiled, just enough to be polite, not enough to be safe. The laughter from Rachel's table was still clinging to the corners of the room when Maggie excused herself. Restroom, she said lightly, sliding her napkin onto the chair. No one looked up. Perfect. The narrow hall toward the front was quieter, the music from the dining room fading into the soft hum of the hostess stand. Julie, the hostess from earlier, was flipping through the reservations book, one manicured nail tracing a list of names. Maggie's eyes flicked to the silver tray beside her, the same one she'd noticed when they arrived. A neat row of business cards sat there, the topmost catching a slant of lamplight. Julie, Maggie said, lowering her voice just enough that it invited confidence. That card, owner? Julie glanced down, then up at Maggie. Mr. Ortiz, Daniel. He's usually here earlier in the evening. Maggie leaned in a little. Do you mind if I take one? Julie hesitated, her eyes narrowing just slightly. Then she slid a single card off the stack and placed it in Maggie's hand like it might be contraband. Don't tell Lori, she said, smiling in a way that wasn't entirely joking. The card was heavy stock, the kind that meant someone cared about first impressions. Daniel Ortiz, Magnolia House Bistro, a Charleston number, and in small italics beneath, proprietor. Maggie traced the embossed lettering with her thumb before tucking it into the side pocket of her purse. By the time she returned to the table, coffee still warm, no one had noticed she'd been gone. That was good. She preferred to move when the room wasn't watching. At home, the house smelled faintly of the lavender sachets she kept in her drawers, a small luxury from years back. Maggie hung her cardigan, slipped into her slippers, and set her purse on the kitchen table. She pulled out the card and laid it in the center, just above the placemat, where the light from the under-cabinet strip made the lettering glow. The landline still sat in its cradle on the wall, an artifact in a world that had forgotten them. She didn't call Daniel yet. First, she dialed a number she knew by muscle memory. "Angela Price?" came the brisk voice on the other end, no greeting wasted. "It's me," Maggie said. Well, you don't usually call after 9 unless someone's bleeding or you're buying something ridiculous." "I'm thinking about buying something," Maggie said, her fingers resting lightly on the business card. "A restaurant." Angela snorted. "Do you even want a restaurant?" "I want this one." Silence. But not the confused kind. Angela was a woman who could find the scent of strategy in a pile of nonsense. "You still have that inheritance sitting in CDs making less than inflation, right?" "Exactly," Maggie said. "It's time it started earning its keep." Angela's voice sharpened. "Then you'll need the bank. Discreetly. No chatter in the wrong ears. I can draw up preliminary questions." Maggie looked at the card again. "I want to meet the bank manager tomorrow, before the dinner crowd even knows this is in motion." "You still work with Sophie Miller at First Atlantic?" "Yes. She's smart. Likes to see people prove a point. I'll call her and tell her you're coming." Morning light in Charleston had a way of sneaking in sideways, gilding the edges of everything. The next day, Maggie walked into First Atlantic Bank in her navy blazer, the one she'd once worn for parent-teacher conferences when she needed to look like she meant business. Sophie Miller came out from behind her desk with a quick, curious smile. Early 40s, sharp eyes behind tortoiseshell frames. She shook Maggie's hand firmly and waved her toward the chair across from her. "Angela says you've got a project," Sophie said, leaning in, elbows on the desk. "I do. I want to buy Magnolia House Bistro." Sophie's eyebrows rose, but her smile didn't fade. "You have timing. Daniel Ortiz has been fishing for the right buyer, and you think you're that buyer?" "I know I am," Maggie said, "but I want the financing structured so I keep some liquidity. I'm putting in a substantial down payment myself." Sophie tapped a pen against her notepad, assessing. "You're not doing this for the romance of owning a restaurant, are you?" Maggie's lips curved, just a little. "Let's call it a blend of practicality and personal satisfaction." "I like a motivated borrower," Sophie said. "Bring me the numbers from Ortiz and we'll fast-track it, but I'll need your word. This stays between us." "You have it," Maggie said. She rose, shook Sophie's hand again, and slipped the card for Daniel Ortiz back into her purse. As she stepped back into the bright Charleston air, the breeze off the harbor carried the smell of salt and possibility. Somewhere inside that restaurant, the same laughter would be happening next weekend, but not under the same owner. She could already see it, and this time, the punchline would be hers. Magnolia House looked different in the daylight. No candlelight softening the corners, no clink of silverware over curated music. Just the bones of the place, wide plank floors scuffed in the high-traffic lanes, crown molding painted a shade too bright, the faint smell of last night's sautéed onions lingering despite the open windows. Daniel Ortiz stood at the front with his hands in his pockets, a man who'd spent too many years in one spot. Mid-50s, hair silvering unevenly, his sport coat hanging looser than the photos on the About Us wall suggested. He offered a hand, his grip warm but tired. "Maggie," he said, "you caught me on a rare morning. I'm not putting out a fire. Come in." She followed him past the hostess stand, where the silver tray of business cards sat refilled, each one perfectly aligned. Her eyes flicked toward it, then forward. Daniel walked with the pace of someone who had once been proud of this place, now measuring its worth in square footage and overdue invoices. "We opened 17 years ago," he said, sweeping an arm toward the dining room. "Used to have a wait list 2 months out for the holidays." "Now?" He shrugged. "Tourist season keeps us alive, locals keep us honest, and the staff." He let the word hang, heavy as an unbussed tray. The booths were upholstered in deep green leather that had cracked at the edges. Maggie ran her fingers along one seam. "Still sturdy," she said. "Mostly," Daniel replied. "But you learn where the flaws are. Lori, for example. You've met her?" "Briefly." He gave a short, dry laugh. "She's talented with regulars she likes, but the complaints, they come in like clockwork. If I let her go, I'd be refilling half the schedule myself until we find someone else. Hard to fire someone in this town without the whole service industry knowing by lunch." They passed into the bar area. Daylight made the smudges on the glassware visible, the dust in the corners of the bottle shelves. Daniel noticed her glance. "We clean nightly. Just, there's always something." The kitchen was another world. Stainless steel, the low hiss of the pilot lights still burning under empty griddles. A line cook in a white apron was prepping onions, his knife steady, the pile growing on a cutting board scarred from years of service. "Good crew back here," Daniel said. "They keep the ship afloat. Equipment's mostly solid. Couple of the burners need replacing. Mixer's temperamental. The walk-in cooler's fine now, but she's had her moments." Maggie opened the cooler door, cool air spilling over her like a wave. Shelves were stacked with fresh herbs, covered trays of marinated meat, a row of glass milk bottles for coffee service. Efficient, not extravagant. She liked that. "And the finances?" she asked, closing the door. Daniel gestured toward his small office at the back. The room smelled faintly of strong coffee and printer ink. He pulled a file folder from the desk drawer, spreading spreadsheets and monthly statements across the desk. "Margins are thinner than I'd like. Rent's stable, thank God for that. Liquor sales keep us afloat in the off-season. You'll see. There's meat here if you know where to carve." Maggie studied the numbers, running a fingertip down a column of expenses. The story they told was clear. This was a restaurant that had lost its appetite but not its potential. "You said you're ready to sell," she said. Daniel leaned back, exhaling as if he'd been holding it in for years. "Within the month, if I can. I'm tired, Maggie. This business, it's in my blood, but it's bled me dry." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Then I want exclusivity while we talk. No shopping me against the next person who wanders in." A slow smile curved his mouth, the first that looked genuine. "You move fast." "I have to." He tapped the file with 2 fingers. "You get your financing lined up, we can have a deal in 2 weeks. I'll give you the run of the place to get familiar, but we keep it quiet until ink hits paper." She extended her hand. "Deal." His grip was firm this time, not just polite. Somewhere in the dining room, a chair scraped across the floor as a staff member set up for the lunch crowd. The sound was ordinary, just part of opening, but to Maggie, it landed like a starter's pistol. She had the lay of the land now. Next came the move that would change everything. The next morning, Maggie was back at First Atlantic, the faint scent of brewed coffee from the lobby mingling with the lemon polish on the counters. Sophie Miller waved her straight in, a closed-door sort of invitation. "I've got the Ortiz numbers," Maggie said, sliding the folder onto Sophie's desk. Sophie opened it and scanned with the quick efficiency of someone used to reading between lines. "Clean enough for financing. Margins are tight, but you've got enough liquidity to soften the edges. If we move fast, you could be owner in 2 weeks." "Faster is better," Maggie said, "before word starts to drift." Sophie's pen scratched against the forms, the rhythm unbroken. "We'll approve this under expedited review. You're a low-risk borrower, Maggie. Angela was right. You're the kind of client banks like to see walk through the door." It took less than an hour. By the time Maggie left, the financing was approved, the loan terms locked in, and Sophie had given her a look that was equal parts professional respect and curiosity about what exactly was driving this quiet urgency. Angela's office was a different world. Warm oak shelves stacked with law books, framed degrees, and a faint, constant scent of peppermint tea. Angela herself sat behind her desk like a chess player about to open with a queen's gambit. "You've got your financing," she said without looking up from her laptop. "I do." Angela's fingers flew over the keyboard. "Then we move to paper. I'll draft the purchase agreement with a 2-week closing date. We'll add a confidentiality clause. Ortiz can't breathe a word to staff or patrons until you sign." Essential, Maggie said. I don't want gossip setting in before I've even got the keys. Angela glanced up, the corners of her mouth lifting. You're already thinking like an owner. Good. Now, down payment? Maggie pulled an envelope from her bag, the cashier's check resting inside like a quiet promise. From the inheritance. I want it on record today. Angela took it without ceremony, sliding it into the folder marked Magnolia House, Purchase. Consider it recorded. Later that afternoon, Maggie met Daniel in his office again. Sunlight was slanting through the blinds, dust motes drifting lazily in the beams. He was hunched over the week's invoices, but when he saw her, he set them aside and reached for a thick packet. Staff schedules, he said. 2 weeks out. Gives you a picture of who works when and... He tapped the list. Who pulls their weight? Maggie flipped through the pages, noting names, shifts, the little penciled-in notes Daniel had left beside certain employees. This will help, she said. He leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I'll keep the day-to-day running as usual until closing, but seeing those papers this morning, knowing it's real. He trailed off, shaking his head with a weary smile. Feels like handing over a child. Maggie met his gaze evenly. I'll take care of it. That evening at home, she spread the schedule across her kitchen table like a battlefield map. Her eyes paused over Saturday's dinner shift, Lori on the floor, Rachel's parents' favorite table in the rotation. She could almost hear the clink of dessert forks, the lift in Elaine's voice when she thought she'd scored a subtle point. Maggie leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. The plan was beginning to crystallize, not revenge for the sake of cruelty, but a correction, a quiet, undeniable statement that the balance of power had shifted. She imagined the moment they'd see her standing there, not as a guest, but as the one who could set the terms. It would be Saturday soon enough. And when it came, the table would be set exactly the way she wanted. Saturday evening slid into Charleston with a golden haze, the kind that made storefront glass shimmer and tourists linger on sidewalks. Inside Magnolia House, the air was cool and perfumed with butter, seared meat, and the faint, sweet note of vanilla from the pastry case. Maggie's table was set in the far corner, near a window that gave her a clear view of both the front door and the dining room's long central aisle. The hostess, at Maggie's quiet request earlier in the week, had ensured it. She arrived 5 minutes early, as always, slipping into the seat where the light fell just behind her shoulder. The first sip of her iced water was cool against the hum of anticipation running under her skin. She didn't need to check her watch to know when they'd arrive. Sure enough, the door swung wide in a gust of humid night air, and in came Rachel, Peter, and the Hugheses like a well-rehearsed stage entrance. Rachel's hair caught the chandelier light, Walter's laugh came a beat too loud, and Elaine's pearls sat perfectly at her collarbone. Lori was there before the hostess could move, greeting them with a warmth she'd never spared for Maggie. A hand on Walter's shoulder, a familiar lean toward Rachel. It was a little performance all its own. Maggie let her gaze drift down to the menu, not because she needed it, but because it gave her the small pleasure of looking entirely unconcerned. When Lori arrived at her table, order pad in hand, Maggie smiled like any other guest. The chef's tasting menu, please, and coffee, and I'll have the dessert course as well. Something flickered across Lori's face, but she wrote it down with professional efficiency. The meal came in stages, each course a quiet exercise in patience. Maggie savored the grilled oysters with lemon foam, the braised short ribs that fell apart under her fork. Each time Lori returned, pouring wine, clearing plates, Maggie thanked her with calm precision, meeting her eyes just long enough to register surprise. From across the room, Rachel's table was animated, voices rising in bursts. Maggie caught snippets, something about renovations on their street, a cruise they might take in the fall. She could feel Walter's glance sweep her way before he leaned toward Elaine and said something that made her lips purse into a smirk. When dessert arrived, a delicate praline tart crowned with spun sugar, Elaine's voice carried. Now this is more your speed, isn't it? Walter chuckled, low. At least she's treating herself tonight. Maggie set her fork down lightly, the spun sugar still trembling. It's wonderful, she told Lori as the plate was set before her. Thank you. Her tone was warm enough to make Lori nod before realizing the exchange had given away nothing. Halfway through her coffee, Daniel appeared at her table, hands in his pockets. His expression was a careful mask, but the crease beside his mouth betrayed the weight of something unsaid. "Got a minute?" he murmured. She followed him to the back office, the muffled clink of silverware fading as the door shut behind them. Papers were spread across his desk, his reading glasses pushed up into his hair. "Just got off the phone with Angela," he said. "Closing date's been moved up. Thursday." For a moment, Maggie didn't answer. She was picturing the calendar in her kitchen, the neat black squares marking time. Thursday meant 4 days. Thursday meant no more pretending to be just another patron. "Why the change?" she asked. "Bank wanted to lock the rate before the quarter ends. Works for me if it works for you." "It works," she said, a slow satisfaction unfurling in her chest. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "By the time they're back here for their next dinner, you'll be signing paychecks." Maggie glanced toward the closed door, as if the hum of the dining room might carry her answer back to that corner table. "Good," she said. "I'd hate for them to miss the main course." She stepped out into the hallway, the scent of praline and coffee drifting in from the kitchen, and thought, the clock had started ticking louder. Thursday morning came dressed in that sharp, clean light Charleston gets when the humidity hasn't woken up yet. Maggie parked 2 blocks from Angela's office, walking the rest of the way with her bag hooked neatly over her arm, the faint click of her low heels against the brick sidewalk sounding like punctuation marks. Angela's receptionist ushered her straight in. The oak desk was cleared except for a stack of cream-colored folders, each marked with neat tabs. Angela herself was in a navy suit, hair swept back, the smile she wore not quite concealing the charge of the moment. "Ready to make this official?" she asked. Maggie sat, signing where Angela's well-manicured finger indicated. The pen was heavy, the ink a deep, certain black. Each signature felt less like writing her name, and more like pressing it into the fabric of something permanent. When the last page was done, Angela slid a thick document into a blue folder and pushed it across the desk. "You are, as of 10:03 this morning, the legal owner of Magnolia House Bistro." Maggie closed her hand over the folder, the paper warm from Angela's touch. She let the weight settle in her lap for a beat before standing. "Then let's get to work." Daniel was waiting at the restaurant, leaning against the hostess stand like a man between lives. He straightened when she came in, a set of keys dangling from his hand. They clinked softly as he dropped them into her palm. "Congratulations, Maggie." His voice carried a thread of relief, maybe even gratitude. "It's yours now." She looked at the keys, polished brass, one tagged office, another kitchen, and then back at him. "Thank you for trusting me with it." He exhaled. "Take care of her." The floor manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Nina, met her in the dining room. Maggie gestured toward an empty booth, and they sat, menus spread out like evidence. "I want to start with service," Maggie said. "Uniform greeting at every table. No favorites, no cold shoulders. We keep the tone warm, but not familiar in ways that cross the line." Nina nodded, jotting notes. "Kitchen runs tight. It's the floor where we get slip-ups. Then we tighten it." They moved on to table settings, menu pacing, and staff communication. Maggie's questions were precise, her adjustments measured. Nothing flashy, nothing that would spook the crew, but enough to signal that the air had shifted. After Nina left, Maggie unlocked the office and sat at Daniel's old desk. The light through the blinds cut the room into clean bars of shadow and sun. She opened the personnel files, flipping through until she found the one she wanted. Lori. The record was thicker than the others. Customer complaints, some formal, some handwritten on sticky notes, instances of tardiness, arguments with kitchen staff, a couple of glowing reviews from favored tables, the kind that proved she could do better when she wanted to. Maggie read every page, her expression never changing. Then she opened a new folder and began drafting termination paperwork. The language was neutral but firm, the date set for Saturday night. She clipped it all together, slid it into the top drawer, and locked it. By the time she stepped back into the dining room, the lunch rush had begun. The sound of cutlery, the low hum of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter. It all belonged to her now. She stood for a moment, absorbing it, then walked the length of the room, her hand brushing the back of each booth like a silent introduction. Saturday, she thought, first night as owner, and when that night came, the real work and the real satisfaction would begin. The low amber glow from the pendant lights made the dining room look like a scene from a postcard. Tables already filling, waitstaff gliding between them with trays balanced high, and the low thrum of conversation punctuated by the pop of corks. Magnolia House was humming, the rhythm steady and assured, and tonight, that rhythm belonged to Maggie. Upstairs in her small office, she stood before the mirror. No sensible cardigans tonight. She'd chosen a deep teal dress that skimmed her frame and a pair of understated pearl earrings, quiet elegance, nothing ostentatious. The kind of outfit that could let her pass as either a guest or the person who paid the invoices. She smoothed her hair back, slipped on a watch she hadn't worn since her retirement party, and took a final breath before heading down. The front door swung open as she stepped into the dining room. Rachel's voice arrived first, bright, a little too loud for the space, followed by Walter's booming laugh and Elaine's refined but pointed, "Oh, it's busy tonight." They moved in a tight little cluster, dressed for the performance of a night out. Laurie met them before the hostess could take a step, smiling like she'd been waiting for this exact table all week. She took Walter's coat with a flourish, bent close to Rachel to share some small conspiratorial joke, and led them toward their favorite spot. When she passed Maggie, there was only the briefest flicker of acknowledgement. "Evening," Laurie said, the word flat, like she was noting the weather. Her eyes barely met Maggie's before they moved on. Maggie didn't slow her own pace, simply let the corner of her mouth lift as she crossed to the bar. Angela was already there, perched on a high stool in a dark blazer, a gin and tonic sweating on the counter in front of her. She had the expression of someone watching a chess match from the winning side. "You look like you're about to host a gala," Angela murmured as Maggie joined her. "I'm just here for dinner," Maggie said, the mildness in her voice betraying nothing. Nina, the floor manager, appeared beside her with the night's seating chart. Maggie leaned over, scanned the penciled-in names and times, then tapped the line for table 6, the Hughes' choice spot. "When the entrees go out," she said quietly. Nina's eyebrows ticked up, but she gave a small nod before slipping back into the current of the dining room. Maggie took her seat at a corner table, angled so she could watch without craning her neck. She ordered the roasted duck, a side of asparagus, and the chocolate bourbon torte for dessert. The courses began to move through the room, silver domes lifted in little bursts of theater, plates set down with murmured descriptions. Across the way, Rachel gestured with her wineglass, her bracelets catching the light. Elaine was leaning toward Laurie, her hand making a small, dismissive wave as if recounting something unworthy of her time. Walter laughed again, the sound carrying just far enough to turn a few heads. Maggie sipped her water and let the details filter in, the way Laurie lingered at their table longer than the others, the extra refill before anyone had to ask, the casual touch to Rachel's shoulder. All the little courtesies that could vanish in an instant. Angela caught her eye from the bar and raised her glass in a small salute. Maggie returned the gesture with a nod, her hand steady. The scent of seared meat drifted from the kitchen, the clatter of pans rising for a moment before being swallowed by the dining room's steady hum. The pace was building, the night leaning toward that perfect midpoint when the first courses are cleared and the anticipation for the main event hangs just long enough to sharpen the appetite. Maggie rested her hands on the table, fingers tapping once against the linen. Entree were about to go out, and with them, the first move in a game they didn't yet know they were playing. The silver domes lifted from entrees in unison, releasing steam and scent into the air, a chorus of rosemary, garlic, and seared meat. Maggie watched from her corner as table 6 leaned in, pleased, their world a small, self-satisfied bubble. She rose slowly, smoothing her dress, letting each step carry the weight of calm inevitability. Heads turned in her wake, not because she commanded attention, but because she moved with the assurance of someone who belonged everywhere she set foot. When she reached their table, Rachel looked up mid-sentence, her smile catching, faltering. "Oh, Maggie," she said, as though finding her there was mildly surprising, mildly inconvenient. "Good evening," Maggie said warmly, her voice carrying just enough to invite nearby tables into the moment. "I hope everything is to your liking tonight." Walter leaned back, fork poised in midair. "Can't complain," he said, though the note in his voice suggested he might if given the opening. Elaine dabbed at the corner of her mouth with her napkin. "We're managing," she said. Maggie's smile deepened. "I'm glad to hear it." She straightened, drawing a slow breath, and turned, not just to them, but to the entire dining room. "If I could have your attention for a moment," she said. Conversations dimmed, the clink of cutlery faded until only the soft background music and the hum of the kitchen remained. Dozens of eyes turned her way. "I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening at Magnolia House Bistro," Maggie began, her voice steady, warm. "It's a special night for me. As of this week, I am the new owner of this restaurant." A ripple of surprise moved through the room, whispers, quick glances. At table 6, Elaine's brow arched sharply. Walter's fork clinked against his plate. Rachel flushed a shade that clashed with the wine in her glass. "I look forward to building on the tradition that's made this place a Charleston favorite," Maggie continued, "and I'm deeply grateful for your patronage as we begin this new chapter." She let the moment settle, then turned slightly toward the service station where Lori stood frozen, tray in hand, the smile she'd been wearing now brittle at the edges. "There will also be some changes to ensure our guests have the very best experience," Maggie said. Her tone didn't sharpen, but it didn't need to. "Lori, thank you for your service here. Effective immediately, your employment is concluded." The words were clean, not cruel, precise as a scalpel. Lori blinked, a quick inhale catching in her throat. "What? You can't just—" "I can," Maggie said, still calm, still holding the room. "And I have." She gestured toward Nina, who was already approaching. "Nina will see you out." For a beat, Lori stood her ground, cheeks flushing, eyes darting toward Rachel's table as though expecting an ally. None of them spoke. Even Rachel, lips parted, found nothing to say. Nina took the tray from Lori's stiff hands and murmured something low. Lori sputtered again, but the sound was lost beneath the renewed murmur of the crowd. The careful clatter of plates as diners began speaking to each other in hushed tones. As Nina guided Lori toward the back, Maggie returned her attention to the room at large. "Now, please, enjoy your meals, and thank you for choosing Magnolia House." The spell broke gently, conversation resuming with an undercurrent of speculation. Maggie let her gaze pass once more over table 6, catching Rachel's eyes just long enough to see the red still high in her cheeks. Then she inclined her head slightly and stepped away, each measured stride taking her toward the bar, where Angela was smiling like someone who'd just witnessed a masterstroke. Maggie didn't sit. She stood watching the dining room settle again and thought, the first course was over. The real feast was still to come. By the next morning, the story had grown legs. Maggie was at her kitchen table with her coffee when the first ping hit her phone, a local food blogger's Instagram post. "Dinner at Magnolia House turned into a scene from a movie. New owner takes the mic, thanks the crowd, and fires a rude server on the spot. Iconic." Underneath, a flood of comments ranged from "Queen Energy" to "Charleston needed this." The pings multiplied. Screenshots of diners' Facebook posts were making the rounds, blurry photos of her standing near table 6, quotes half remembered but mostly correct. Someone had posted a short video, grainy but unmistakable, of Lori's shocked face and Maggie's composed expression. It had already been shared 200 times. Not all the responses were praise. A Twitter thread had sprung up accusing her of public humiliation and management via spectacle. One commenter sniffed, "Not professional to make a scene, no matter the provocation." Maggie scrolled once, then set the phone down. She'd learned long ago that looking too closely at noise made you hear it longer than it lasted. Before noon, her desk phone rang. Sophie's voice came through bright and crisp. "Funds have cleared, Maggie. Transfer is complete. Magnolia House is yours without a penny outstanding." Maggie smiled into the receiver. "Good to hear, Sophie. Let's make sure the accounts stay as clean as the plates leaving my kitchen. Angela stopped by that afternoon, dropping into the chair across from Maggie's desk with a legal pad and a raised brow. "You made a splash," she said, "and I'm not talking about the stock pot in the kitchen." "I'm aware," Maggie said. Angela leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Just know, Rachel's parents aren't the sort to lick their wounds quietly. They'll frame this however they can, especially if they think they can bruise your reputation before it sets." "Then we make the reputation harder to bruise," Maggie replied. The next days were a flurry. Table settings tightened, every fork aligned, every water glass filled before the first menu hit the table. She had Nina retrain the staff on greeting protocols, timing checks, and plate presentation. Maggie worked the floor herself during the busiest hours, introducing herself to guests, asking about their meals, and remembering their answers. The shift was immediate. Tips went up. Online reviews ticked upward with phrases like "new energy" and "polished service." The reservation book, which had been comfortably half full, began to fill to the margins. By Wednesday, they were booking 2 weeks out for weekends. In the middle of the rush, Maggie kept her composure, never letting the pace or praise dull her focus. The plan wasn't just to recover from a scene, it was to plant her ownership so deeply in the public's mind that no whisper campaign could uproot it. Thursday morning, as she was reviewing invoices in the office, Nina came in holding an envelope. "This came by courier. Thought you'd want to open it yourself." The paper was thick, the handwriting on the front unfamiliar. Inside, a printed letter on official-looking stationery. "Notice of formal complaint. Charleston Business Bureau." The language was clipped and full of vague accusations, claims of creating a hostile dining environment, demeaning treatment of staff, and unprofessional conduct unfit for hospitality. Attached were signatures: Walter Hughes, Elaine Hughes. Maggie read it twice, then set it down carefully, as though it were something that might stain if she wasn't careful. Nina shifted her weight. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing," Maggie said. Her voice was even, but there was a heat under it, banked and deliberate. "Not yet." She closed the letter back into its envelope and slid it into the desk drawer. The hum of the dining room filtered in from beyond the door. Cutlery, soft conversation, the distant knock of the kitchen printer. If they wanted to play this game, she thought, they were going to find out she had more than one course planned. The inspector arrived without warning, just after the lunch rush on Friday, clipboard in hand, city badge gleaming under the fluorescence. Nina appeared at Maggie's office door. "We've got company," she murmured, voice pitched low. Maggie smoothed her skirt, rose, and walked out without haste. "Welcome to Magnolia House," she said, meeting the inspector's eyes. "You'll want the full tour, I'm sure." They began in the kitchen. The inspector's gaze swept over everything: the gleaming counters, the storage shelves lined with neatly labeled bins, the spotless cutting board stacked by size. He pulled open the cooler door, thermometer already in hand. Maggie noted the way her kitchen staff froze for half a heartbeat before resuming their work, each motion now just a bit more deliberate. A few notes were jotted on the clipboard. "This storage bin's missing a label," the inspector said, tapping a clear container of herbs. "On it," one of the prep cooks called, already peeling a label from the roll and writing in block letters. They moved to the fry station. "Bit of grease here," the inspector said, pointing with his pen. The line cook grabbed a rag and cleaner before the sentence was finished. Maggie caught the faintest curve at the inspector's mouth, not approval yet, but interest. The walkthrough continued: dry storage, dish pit, pantry. At each stop, the only issues were small: a single dented can pulled from a stack, a missing date on a sauce container. Each correction happened immediately without complaint or delay. Back in the main kitchen, the inspector flipped a page on his clipboard. "I don't see many operations respond this fast," he said, his tone warmer now. "Your crew's disciplined." "They're professionals," Maggie said. She didn't smile. She let the words stand on their own. He scribbled a few final notes, then tucked the pen behind his ear. "Minor infractions only. You'll have the official report in 3 days, but, off the record, you're in excellent shape." When the inspector left, Maggie gathered the kitchen team near the prep counter. Steam from the dish pit curled behind them, the low sizzle of the grill punctuating her words. "You handled that exactly the way I expect this place to handle everything, promptly, cleanly, without fuss," she said, "which is why you're each getting a bonus this week." There were quick smiles, surprised laughter. One of the younger cooks asked if she was serious. "Deadly," Maggie said, already turning toward her office. "Now, let's get ready for dinner service." By that evening, word had begun to circulate. The inspector's visit had been witnessed by a couple of early dinner guests, and their version was already on social media. Magnolia House handled a surprise inspection like pros. Place was spotless. Kitchen teams no joke. More posts followed, some from regulars who'd heard the gossip, others from people who simply wanted to be seen aligning with a winner. The official inspection report, when it came, confirmed it. Top marks, meets and exceeds standards, stamped across the top in clean black ink. Maggie read it at her desk, the satisfaction quiet but deep. This had been meant as a blow. She could see Rachel's fingerprints all over the timing, but instead it had burnished her reputation. Outside her office window, the dining room filled for the night. Voices rose and fell in the warm rhythm of service, the clink of glass and plate like music. The complaint was nothing now. The smear had missed its mark, but she knew better than to think they'd stop here. If anything, the failed attempt meant they'd come at her harder next time, and Maggie Dawson had no intention of being caught standing still when they did. On Tuesday afternoon, Nina slipped into Maggie's office with a printout in hand. "Critic," she said simply, tapping the paper. It was a reservation confirmation, one name standing out in bold italics: Thomas Ellery, food columnist for the Charleston Gazette. Maggie leaned back in her chair. "When?" "Tomorrow night. Table for one. 7 o'clock. Put him by the front windows," Maggie said. "He likes to people watch, and make sure his server is Lucas. He never misses a beat." Wednesday evening, the air in Magnolia House carried a sharper edge of purpose. The front windows gleamed from a fresh polish, candles at each table burned with even flames, and the faint notes of jazz drifted just loud enough to be heard between conversations. When Ellery arrived, slim, glasses perched halfway down his nose, Maggie herself greeted him at the door. "Mr. Ellery, welcome," she said, the warmth in her voice genuine but measured. "We've prepared a table that I think you'll enjoy." He glanced around, taking in the bustle before following her to the corner window seat. From there he could see the whole dining room, the street beyond, and the choreography of the staff. Lucas appeared with water before Ellery had even settled his coat. "Chef's compliments," he said, setting down a small amuse-bouche. Tiny tart shells filled with whipped goat cheese and a drizzle of rosemary honey. The service unfolded like clockwork. Plates arrived at the perfect moment, each one explained with quiet precision: seared scallops over sweet corn puree, lamb shank with a time reduction, finishing with the chocolate bourbon torte that gleamed under a thin sheet of caramel. Maggie kept her distance, watching the rhythm from across the room, stepping in only to smooth a detail, replacing a candle that burned too low, adjusting the flowers in a nearby vase. Ellery ate without rush, his pen moving now and then across a small leather notebook. No visible signs of delight, but no frowns either, just the cool concentration of a man gathering impressions. When dessert was cleared, Maggie approached with 2 small cups of espresso. "On the house," she said. "I hope your evening's been a pleasant one." He regarded her over the rim of his glasses. "You've made changes," he said. She smiled. "Just a few." The review landed the following Monday. Headline: Magnolia House, a refreshing new chapter. Ellery praised the polished but unpretentious service, the renewed attention to plate composition, and a vision that understands both tradition and momentum. The closing line read, "Under its new owner, Magnolia House feels less like a business and more like a promise kept." The impact was immediate. By noon, the online reservation system had crashed under the influx of requests. When it came back up, weekends were booked out for the next 3 weeks. The phone lines buzzed with callers begging for cancellations they could snap up. Staff energy shifted too. Servers straightened their shoulders, kitchen laughter ran louder between orders, and even the dishwashers moved with a rhythm that seemed lighter. Maggie noticed it all but said little, letting the pride settle in naturally. By Thursday, she was sketching ideas in a leather-bound notebook at her office desk. Community nights, scrawled across the top of the page. She pictured a rotating prix-fixe menu featuring local produce, live jazz trios in the corner, maybe even hosting charity dinners for neighborhood causes. It would root Magnolia House deeper into Charleston than any review could. Nina poked her head in. "We're full tonight again, and tomorrow, and the day after." "Good," Maggie said, closing the notebook. "Let's make sure they keep coming for the right reasons." But as she moved to the window overlooking the dining room, watching the tables fill with faces she didn't yet know, a thought threaded through the satisfaction. Rachel's family would see every word of that review, and they wouldn't take it as a surrender. If anything, the next move on their side was already in play. The lunch crowd was just beginning to build when the front door swung open, and in walked Rachel, Walter, and Elaine. No Peter this time. Sunlight spilled in behind them, catching the shimmer of Elaine's scarf and the faint, smug set of Walter's jaw. Maggie was at the hostess stand before anyone else could move. "Welcome to Magnolia House," she said, her tone polite but infused with a quiet authority. "Your table's ready." She led them herself, not to their usual corner, but to a table near the center, where they were visible from every angle. The linen was crisp, the cutlery gleamed, and the vase held fresh tulips in a shade that almost matched Elaine's lipstick. "I trust this will do," Maggie said, pulling out Elaine's chair with a small, deliberate smile. "It's fine," Elaine replied, smoothing her scarf. Lucas appeared within moments, menus in hand, offering water with lemon. The service was seamless. Orders taken without delay, bread arriving warm with softened butter, wine poured with a steady hand. Every detail was textbook, every interaction polite, but not obsequious. They started with the she-crab soup, its aroma rich and delicate. When the entrees came, pan-seared salmon for Walter, roast chicken for Elaine, a beet salad for Rachel, the plates were perfect, the timing flawless. Walter cut into his salmon, then leaned back slightly. "You know," he said, voice pitched for the table but carrying a touch too far. "Last time we were here, there was that dessert situation." Rachel shifted in her seat, eyes flicking toward her mother. Elaine's hand paused over her fork. Maggie didn't miss a beat. "Yes, I remember," she said lightly, as though he'd mentioned the weather. "That evening was the start of several improvements we've made. I'm glad you're here to see the difference." She turned to Lucas. "Would you bring our guests a taste of the lemon sorbet between courses? Compliments of the house." Walter's mouth closed on whatever he'd been about to add. Throughout the meal, Maggie kept the pace unhurried but precise. Plates were cleared as soon as they were finished, wine glasses refilled before they were empty. No stray crumb lingered on the tablecloth. No request had to be repeated. At one point, Elaine caught another diner glancing their way and flashed a quick, brittle smile, the kind meant for public consumption. Maggie saw it for what it was, a performance for the room, meant to project grace under scrutiny. By the time dessert arrived, creme brulee with its sugar shell perfectly torched, they'd run out of ways to prod. Conversation at their table was stilted, the pauses too long, their glances toward Maggie fleeting but edged. When they stood to leave, Elaine adjusted her scarf again, her eyes darting briefly toward the other patrons before she said, "Thank you, Maggie." Everything was proper. "Always a pleasure," Maggie replied, her voice neutral as glass. She watched them walk out into the midday sun, their posture just a little too stiff to be casual. Angela emerged from the bar, where she'd been watching with the calm amusement of a cat at a fishbowl. "You just starved their drama," she said, joining Maggie at the hostess stand. "They came for a scene and left with perfect service. No story to tell." Maggie's gaze lingered on the door as it swung shut behind them. "Let them go hungry," she said. But even as she returned to the dining room, the satisfaction wasn't quite whole. She knew people like the Hugheses didn't walk away. They regrouped. And the next time they came back, it wouldn't be for lunch. The meeting room at the Charleston Tourism Board was all polished wood and tall windows, sunlight pooling across rows of neatly arranged chairs. A modest stage sat at the front with a lectern, a pitcher of water, and the city seal on a banner behind it. Maggie stood off to the side, notes in hand, but she hardly needed them. The place was full: business owners, city officials, reporters, and a handful of curious locals. The air buzzed with the soft clink of coffee cups and the low hum of networking when the moderator introduced her, owner of the newly revitalized Magnolia House Bistro, Maggie Dawson. The applause came warm and sustained. She stepped up to the microphone, the sound of her low heels steady against the floor. "Thank you," she began, letting her gaze sweep the room. "When I bought Magnolia House, I wasn't just buying a business. I was investing in a piece of Charleston's history and in the people who keep it alive." She spoke about the responsibility of preserving historic district businesses, about balancing tradition with the small, intentional changes that kept a place vibrant. She talked of hiring local, sourcing from nearby farms, and creating spaces that made both tourists and residents feel welcome. As she paused to take a sip of water, her eyes caught on a face near the back. Rachel. Arms crossed, expression smooth as stone, not even pretending to clap. Maggie didn't break stride. She finished with a call for collaboration. "If we share our stories and resources, we can make Charleston's historic district more than a postcard. We can make it a living, breathing community." The room erupted in applause. Sincere, loud enough to drown out any quiet disapproval. After a brief intermission, the tourism board chair took the podium. "We're pleased to announce the recipients of this year's Historic District Small Business Improvement Grants," she said, unfolding a crisp list. "One of our largest awards, for patio renovations and menu expansion, goes to Magnolia House Bistro." There was another round of applause, and a few heads turned toward Maggie, offering smiles and congratulations. She rose, shaking the chair's hand and posing for a quick photo with the oversized check. Within a week, local papers ran the headline, "Magnolia House Wins Tourism Board Grant, Plans Patio Expansion, Dessert Menu Revival." The article featured a photo of Maggie in front of the restaurant, blueprint in hand, and a quote about her vision. "A place where dessert is not an afterthought. It's the encore." Other coverage followed. A regional magazine interviewed her about Charleston's evolving food scene. A hospitality podcast asked her to share her story. A downtown merchants group invited her to join their board. She accepted, carefully. She was building something bigger than just a restaurant. She was building her seat at the table. In the meantime, Rachel's own seat was starting to wobble. The Grant story, repeated in news outlets and shared online, cast Maggie as a savvy, community-minded businesswoman. That image contrasted sharply with the gossip, much of it true, about Rachel and her family's snide treatment of her. One local blogger, in a piece about Southern civility, even hinted at the dessert incident as an example of how not to treat someone in public. Though Rachel's name wasn't printed, those who knew the players didn't need it spelled out. By the end of the month, a friend of a friend had whispered to Angela that Rachel's committee seat on a local charity board was under review. The reason given? Concerns about professionalism and public image. Angela relayed the news to Maggie over coffee. "Seems the tide's shifting," she said. Maggie stirred her cup slowly. Tides have a way of pulling things out to sea when you're not watching. The patio plans were approved, the dessert menu drafted, featuring that praline tart, now plated with an elegance Lori would never have imagined. Magnolia House's evening tables were booked solid, and lunchtime was catching up. Still, Maggie knew better than to think this was the end of it. Rachel wasn't the type to vanish quietly, and people backed into a corner didn't always act predictably. From her office window, Maggie watched the early dinner crowd gathering on the sidewalk outside, the late sunlight catching the new planters flanking the door. The restaurant was thriving, her name was gaining weight in the city, and somewhere Rachel Hughes was learning what it felt like to lose ground. The next move, Maggie suspected, wouldn't be subtle. Sunday morning sunlight slanted through the Magnolia House windows, painting soft gold over the polished tables and the neat rows of coffee cups warming on the espresso machine. Maggie was checking the reservation list when she noticed a lone figure at the entrance, hands in pockets, posture hesitant. Peter. He wasn't dressed for drama. Khakis, a pale blue button-down, hair a little mussed as if he'd driven with the windows down. He gave a small wave, the kind that looked like it might vanish if she didn't return it. "Maggie," he said when she reached the door, his voice low. "Got a minute?" She studied him for a beat before stepping aside. "Come in." They settled at a quiet corner table near the front, the kind she reserved for private conversations. A server brought coffee without being asked, setting down cream and sugar before retreating. Peter wrapped his hands around the mug but didn't drink. "I should have said something back then. When they—" He let the words trail off, searching for the right shape. "When they went after you over nothing." Maggie kept her expression neutral. "You were quiet." "I was," he admitted. "Too quiet. And it wasn't because I agreed with them. They mocked me too. Behind my back to my face in that joking way. I thought keeping my head down was the safest route. Turns out it just made me a coward." The honesty in his tone landed heavier than she expected. He wasn't fishing for forgiveness, just setting down something he'd been carrying. She let a moment pass, the murmur of brunch prep from the kitchen filling the space. "You hungry?" she asked at last. He blinked. "What?" "Sunday brunch," she said. "On the house. You can see what the place looks like when it's mine." By 10:30, the dining room was alive with clinking cutlery and the rich scent of maple syrup and coffee. Maggie guided Peter through the bustle, pointing out the refinished woodwork, the new art on the walls, the patio framed by fresh planters. Every table was full, laughter and conversation overlapping in a comfortable hum. He noticed the staff, too, servers moving with an easy confidence, kitchen runners gliding out with plates balanced like choreography. "Feels different," he said quietly. "It is," Maggie replied. "It's not just a restaurant anymore. It's a place where everyone knows they're part of something." They sat near the window, sunlight spilling over plates of crab cakes, Benedict, biscuits with whipped honey butter, and fruit glistening under a drizzle of mint syrup. Peter ate slowly, taking in the room as much as the food. "You did this," he said finally, setting down his fork. "I had help," she said. "But yes, I did." He hesitated, then asked, "Do you need any help keeping it this way?" Maggie studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. "Funny you should ask. I'm looking for someone to handle part-time bookkeeping. The numbers are too important to juggle between a dozen other things." Peter looked surprised, then thoughtful. "I could do that. I still have my CPA license. And—" he gave a small, sheepish shrug. "It'd be nice to be somewhere that doesn't see me as the punchline." Maggie set her cup down. "Then come by Tuesday. We'll make it official." They lingered until the last of the brunch crowd began to clear. Outside, the street shimmered with late-morning heat, and inside, the staff reset for the lunch service without missing a beat. As Peter left, he paused at the door. "Thanks, Maggie, for, letting me back in the door." She met his eyes evenly. "Don't thank me yet. Just show up." When he was gone, she returned to her office, the ledger still open on her desk. It felt strange, the idea of having him in her corner now, but not unwelcome. Still, a corner of her mind stayed watchful. She knew this story with Rachel's family hadn't played its last scene, and when it did, Peter's presence could be an asset or a liability. The last lunch guests had barely cleared before the blinds were drawn and the "closed for private event" sign went up in Magnolia House's front window. The dining room smelled faintly of rosemary and lemon from the midday service, but the tables were now pushed to the sides, leaving the center open for a long buffet of wine, sparkling water, and platters of hors d'oeuvres. Maggie stood by the bar, sleeves rolled, hair swept back, watching as her staff trickled in. Servers still in their black shirts, kitchen crew with jackets swapped for t-shirts, laughter loosening the posture of a workday. Sophie arrived in a linen dress, Angela in her usual tailored blazer, and Peter in a clean button-down that made him look younger than he had in years. Once everyone had a drink in hand, Maggie stepped forward. The chatter softened, then hushed. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began, her voice warm but clear, "about what makes a place worth walking into. worth staying for. She let her eyes move across the room, at Lucas leaning against the counter, at Nina standing with her arms folded but smiling, at the line cook who'd once blushed through a compliment from the health inspector. Food matters, atmosphere matters, but the real ingredient, the one you can't fake, is respect for the craft, for the guests, for each other. She lifted her glass. So here's to respect being the main ingredient here, every day, no matter who walks in that door. Glasses lifted in response, the cheer echoing off the old crown molding. A few claps followed, and then the music started. A soft jazz trio piped through the sound system, the same playlist Maggie had picked for her first night as owner. Nina stepped forward then, holding something wrapped in brown paper. "From all of us," she said, a little awkward but grinning. "For the boss who makes us want to come to work." Maggie peeled back the paper to reveal a photograph, framed in dark wood, of opening night under her ownership. The shot caught her mid-laugh behind the bar, Angela in the background, the dining room full, candles glowing. She felt the breath catch before she could stop it. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "You didn't have to." "We wanted to," Lucas interrupted. "That night changed this place." Sophie clinked her glass against Maggie's. "You changed this place." Peter, standing just behind Sophie, added with a crooked smile, "And somehow, you let me be part of it." The room eased into motion again, staff swapping stories, Sophie and Angela deep in conversation near the buffet, Peter laughing with a prep cook over some long-forgotten lunch rush disaster. The music wove through it all, mellow and unhurried, the kind of sound that made you want to linger. Maggie found herself by the window for a moment, looking out at the empty patio where the new furniture would go soon. The night air pressed faintly against the glass, carrying the scent of the street's magnolias. "They thought the joke was on me," she murmured, almost to herself. "They didn't know I'd own the punchline." Angela appeared at her side, catching the line with a knowing glance but saying nothing, just a small conspiratorial smile. The evening stretched on in that easy, unforced way that only happens when no one is looking at the clock. Someone started passing around little espresso cups. The pastry chef appeared with a tray of bite-sized praline tarts, each crowned with spun sugar that shimmered in the low light. Maggie took one, the caramel threads catching against her lip as she bit into it. Around her the laughter swelled again, voices overlapping, glasses clinking, the sound warm enough to feel like its own kind of protection. She raised her tart slightly as if toasting the room without calling attention to it. And yes, dessert was on me.